Today's show is sponsored by CloudZero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, CloudZero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, CloudZero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, CloudZero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And as I hit record on this, we are closing out September, and it is a short news week this week, so we're going to dive right in and get on to our main segment on the state of cloud security right after this. So let's dig in. Here is the first article this week. This is all about a trend that we're seeing with the major cloud providers and the profits or the percentages that they're keeping in their marketplace. This is part of a larger trend, actually, we're seeing. We've seen Google Play do it in their store earlier this year. We've seen Apple and certainly with Epic Games and the lawsuits and everything going on there. And then it's trickled down to the main marketplaces for the big public clouds. So this article is all about Google, and Google is slashing the amount it keeps from sales on its marketplace from 20% down to 3%. This follows exactly what Microsoft did recently on the Azure marketplace. And if you're keeping square out there as well, AWS is at 5%, but they are the market leader. And so maybe they're just comfortable there and they want to keep that slight premium. And Google and Azure are certainly in that position of being second, being third, trying to catch up. And this is less and less about being able to demand a premium and more about just making sure hosting those applications, doing everything that they do on the front end and on the back end, that they're getting paid for that and isn't necessarily a big cash revenue generating stream like it used to be. I think it's a good trend across cloud computing and really across the industry in general as well. For our second article today, we're also talking about Google Cloud. Google Cloud went out and released the 2021 Accelerate State of DevOps report. And so we talk about these reports pretty frequently on the show. I think this one is definitely worth going and taking a look at. The link is in the show notes. Now, you will have to put in your information to go ahead and get access to the report, but lots of good data and certainly things to really dig into as we really go into this fall and conference season. You're starting to see a lot of stats and a lot of statistics, and this certainly is another data point for everyone that is out there. For our third news item this week, we're going to be talking a little bit about marketing stacks, actually. And this is something Brian and I talk about kind of behind the scenes frequently as well. This changing of the industry as we go to SaaS-based models. Well, what does that do to the business overall at a high level? Obviously, it changes the revenue streams, it changes the funding models, and also it changes the tools that are used. And so this is actually a talk that was given, another podcast that's out there that we both listen to called SaaStr. They actually have a conference as well, and this was a talk given by Marqeta's CMO all about their marketing stack, the tools that they use, and how classical marketing and how leads are generated has changed. And so if you are at all interested in that portion of the business, leads generation, tools, even technical marketing, it is worth going out and taking a look at how this is rapidly changing. This idea of running campaigns and generating a lot of funds and really doing things the old way, it just isn't there anymore. And they introduced this idea of intent-based marketing, and it's really definitely worth digging into as well. And that's going to wrap it up for Cloud News of the Week. Right after the break, we're going to be talking about the state of cloud security.
Today's show is brought to you by CBT Nuggets. You know how much we value ongoing education on the Cloudcast, and CBT Nuggets is exactly what Aaron and I wish we had when we were trying to get our certification early in our careers. CBT Nuggets is all about bringing a personalized touch to learning about cloud computing, virtualization, networking, DevOps, and much, much more. Whether it's their hands-on labs with personalized coaching or the online chat functions that come up with every instructor-led course, CBT Nuggets' team of experts is always there to help you get the most from your training and your path to certification. You can check it all out at cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast and sign up for a free trial. You get access to the full catalog of great training, including virtual labs, quizzes, and other premium features completely free for the first 7 days. That's cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast. Today's show is sponsored by Veeam. The forecast is showing clouds, so make sure you're prepared with simple, secure, and cost-effective cloud data protection from Veeam. Take advantage of this exclusive Veeam offer that includes unlimited AWS or Azure backup free for 30 days. That's free for 30 days. $250 in cloud credits and 25% off when you buy 12 months. Veeam has you covered. To check out this offer, visit vee.am, Veeam/free-Azure-backup-credits. That's vee.am/free-Azure-backup-credits. And we're back. And folks, not a day goes by these days in the cloud where we're not talking about security. And, we're not talking about a hack, somebody's been compromised. We're talking about supply chains. We're talking about all sorts of stuff. It's, sort of a constant topic, but it feels like the volume of it has grown a little bit over the last maybe few months, but also feels like the last 12, 18 months. There's been a lot of notice. And I think a lot of that is, partially because we live in a really digital world. We live in a really online world. And so, the things we do have broad, not only digital interactions, but security ramifications. And, we thought, let's try and get some perspective on this, because I know a few weeks ago, I did sort of a long rambling rant saying, I can't quite wrap my head around what's going on with security. So I thought, let's go out and talk to some folks who live with this stuff and know it really, really well. So it's good to have back a friend of the show, Josh Stella, who is co-founder and CEO of Fugue. Josh, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks. It's great to be back.
Yeah, so it's been a little while since we had you on. We probably should do this more frequently. For folks that may not know you or the work that you've been working on, give us a little bit of your background, and then we're going to talk a little bit about a report that Fugue put out recently called The State of Cloud Security. So, not only give us a little bit of your background, but also, kind of what was some of the thought process and methodology behind the report?
Sure thing. So a little background on Fugue and me. Fugue is a cloud security company. We've been around for a little while. We secure millions of resources for our customers across the AWS, Azure, and GCP clouds. We're really some of the inventors. We have some fundamental patents on policy as code as it relates to cloud infrastructure and IAC, things like that. My background, I'm a CEO now, so I'm not as smart as I used to be. I was a developer and software architect for many years. Prior to founding Fugue, most recently at AWS, where I was a principal solutions architect focused on national security. So my background is kind of bouncing back and forth between national security kinds of settings and high-tech companies. So the State of Cloud Security Report, we do this every year. This year we did it in collaboration with our friends and partners over at Sonatype.
Mm-hmm.
And once a year we survey 300 organizations that are operating at scale on the cloud. And we don't survey them about our product or anything like that. We survey them about what they're thinking about as it comes to, cloud security, just so, we can learn where people's heads are.
Yeah.
And it every year it proves to be surprising, sometimes in a combination of good and bad ways, from my perspective.
Sure. No, and that's, obviously there's a lot of reports that come out. We always love to dig into the ones that are based on, actual usage patterns, very open-ended questions from, customer engagement and market engagement. So this one, not only grabbed our eye because of you guys' work, Sonatype's work, but, just kind of, like I said, the state of what's going on in the world. It feels like, lots of attention was placed around the SolarWinds hack. Microsoft recently had a very high profile, database security flaw. It feels like there's a lot of things going on around security. It feels like, there's, kind of regular loss of 100 million credit cards or identities. Like, what's, from your perspective, you live in this world, you've lived in it for a long time. Like, where are we right now? Are we in a unique state in terms of, where we are with security? Are we in something that's different than the last few years? Like, kind of, I don't know, paint me a broad picture of where we are.
Sure. So I think that the market is finally waking up in a real way to the fact that cloud security and data center security don't look a whole lot alike. And the reason for that is really the interface to the infrastructure. Back in the day, your interface was you would pull something out onto a data floor and plug a wire into it.
Right.
It was a very human, very high friction, very slow way to deal with infrastructure. And security, therefore, and also typically boxed by TCP/IP networks that were organized into, defense in depth strategies. Now, the cloud is just fundamentally different. It's all API driven. And so, where it might have taken a year to build or upgrade a significant network in the past, that can be done in 5 minutes now with a script. And the friction has gone away. So that means security has to move a whole lot faster. But also the perimeters that we were used to are largely irrelevant in the cloud. Almost all cloud breaches are conducted through the attack surface is the configuration of cloud resources, and the actual hacks are perpetrated using control plane API calls, not things like data exfiltration through networks. So I think this fundamental difference in how to approach these things has implications, and as we see in the survey and as we're seeing out in the market, folks are really now getting wiser to this. So one of the things I was very pleased with in the survey is every year we ask, what are your greatest concerns around misconfiguration in terms of services? And for the first time this year, IAM was the top reply. That's good, because IAM is effectively the network in cloud deployments.
Right.
And it is how hackers are getting stuff. So it's good to see that. In addition, I think the rise of people looking at policy as code as it relates to their infrastructure as code and quote unquote shifting security left, which really is extending it left. You still need it in the runtime. The popularity of this, it's almost like it took a number of years where people thought, well, IAC will solve a bunch of these problems, and then realizing actually it doesn't. And well, now we need to check the IAC, and that can be done in such a way that the DevOps teams are, directly involved instead of security being after the fact. So there is a lot going on. I think a lot of it's kind of under the surface if you don't live and breathe this every day.
Yeah.
But there's some really positive movement from our perspective.
Okay, good. I do want to dig into the infrastructure as code pieces of this and DevSecOps in just a bit. I want to ask sort of an ignorant question. Somebody who kind of views these things from the outside. You live on the inside of this. We see some things happen like the recent Microsoft issue or flaw where database keys were exposed, or the potential for those things were exposed. On one hand, we see survey after survey come out where CIOs will say, look, security is a top 1, top 2 concern to us. These breaches happen. And again, it doesn't, I called out Microsoft, but it could be credit card company. It could be a retail company. And the market sort of, feigns concern for a day or so, but like the markets don't impact the price of the stock. It doesn't. So like I'm trying to kind of rationalize this thing of security is really important to us, but then when we screw up security, the market doesn't seem to care. Like, how do I rationalize those two things? Is it just we live in a difficult world of security and hence those things happen, or does the financial markets just not sort of understand the ramifications of the technology? Like, I don't know. Help me understand why I see these two things as sort of feel like they're going in different directions.
Boy, if I can talk a lot about computer security and cloud security in particular, I cannot understand why markets do what they do. I think that's been a topic of great concentration by a great many people smarter than me for a long time. I think in some examples you do see the market react. SolarWinds definitely felt that way when Imperva was breached. Mm-hmm. A couple of years ago, their CEO was out in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So it can happen. I think that a lot of people say security is really top of mind. It's a top priority, but I've only seen it be that top priority if the business results are highly dependent on security. So, for example, when I was at AWS, they really do take it very, very seriously for the stuff that they are controlling. I trust them a lot because it's the wrong kind of breach caused by them making an error on their side, as opposed to a customer making an error when using those services, which is mostly all of what you see, aside from this most recent Microsoft breach. That would have a huge impact on their ability to sell AWS as a product.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, so they take it really seriously.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. And it's like you said, it's, ultimately you got to connect it to driving business results. And so it makes sense. And it makes me, puts a little bit of smile on my face that it's sort of complicated in multiple ways such that there's not sort of an easy answer. So I don't feel as bad about sort of not being able to connect the dots myself. I want to come back to the thing that we were talking about before in terms of, we went from human configurations to more and more infrastructure as code, various ways of automating things. And you said, well, that didn't necessarily really solve the problem. We still sort of have another step or another hurdle to get through. Can you kind of walk us through kind of what that automation infrastructure as code didn't necessarily live up to or didn't do yet, and then what are those next things that people need to start incorporating into their operations, their security best practices?
Sure thing. So infrastructure as code, as it has become popular, really never took security into deep consideration as a fundamental aspect of its design. And I think this is the other problem we have in security, is that a lot of CIOs are looking for silver bullets, something that can be kind of applied after the fact, when actually, and this is exacerbated on the cloud, it's much more this way on the cloud. Most of security is architectural on the cloud. It's how you're designing the system. not so much how you're quote unquote securing the system. If you did, like Fugue, for example, we are built largely with Lambda functions. And there's beautiful aspects to this from a security perspective. If you understand the sharp edges, in that, when we were going through our SOC 2 accreditation, our auditors said, well, how are you patching operating systems? And we said, we don't manage any operating systems. Right. We don't have access to any operating systems. So it's a non-issue for us. Yeah. So, but broadly, the point that I'm trying to make here is that that getting security right in the cloud is an engineering practice. It's a software development issue, not a perimeter defense issue. And so IAC is a very natural place to apply computer science and software engineering to augment security. Now, as with most things in our industry, the principal goals as IAC kind of became popularized were ease of understanding, ease of mental model, making stuff that people could understand and stuff that you could make a lot of money on quickly. And that's fundamentally the endemic problem in the computing industry is growth matters more than correctness. And by correctness, I mean that in a pretty formal way. Like, is the system going to do what it's intended to do? That counts for less than going fast and growing top line in business. That's a fundamental tension, right, between building systems that have high quality, and I would argue that security is a side effect of quality or a side effect of correctness, a subset of it, if you will, and shipping stuff fast. And we all live with that tension. So with IAC, people ran out and built a bunch of IAC thinking, well, for example, I used to hear this a lot a couple of years ago. If we just build a library of secure Terraform or CloudFormation templates and tell our developers to use those, then we will be handling security as it relates to those infrastructure components. And that just doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen for a couple of reasons. At least a couple of reasons. One is you cannot assert enough specificity of configuration that will work across a large organization. Our customers are folks like Red Ventures. They own CNET. They have hundreds and hundreds of cloud environments.
Right.
You can't centrally assert, here is the network that will work for all of you and only use this. That's not going to work across all of them. And so changes get made in different ways. Also, IAC, how it has been popularized, IAC as it exists now, is really pretty bad at noticing change over time. There's kind of a naive assumption a lot of people have that if I build this network securely, I don't have to worry about it anymore. And that's just simply not true.
Right.
So the answer to this is policy as code. And particularly being able to write policies that work both with IAC and in the runtime. In other words, having a single expression of policy as code that you can apply to pre-flighting your IAC templates, but then you can also use for monitoring the runtime post-deployment. Am I explaining that okay? Is that making sense?
Yeah, no, and that makes a ton of sense because it's one of the things that even in conversations for kind of why we've seen some of the popular automation things sort of get supplanted, if you will, by things like Kubernetes. You have this deterministic nature to it, right? It deploys it, but then it also sort of keeps track of what's going on with things, and that's for containers and pods and stuff. But yeah, it makes sense that you not only have to have something that can be flexible, can be policy driven, but also needs to keep track of what's going on, because stuff no matter how much you think it doesn't drift, it drifts. And
That's right.
somebody SSH'd into it, and you created a policy so that they were like, well, what if a bad thing happens? Can I just jump in and fix it? And no, it makes a ton of sense. I'm curious, just as sort of a follow up to that. We've seen sort of some sort of next generation, from the IAC community starting to pick up on this idea of GitOps, where we're sort of incorporating software-driven tooling, but in a little more. Do you see the same sort of challenges with this sort of GitOps world that's evolving? Is it kind of just a next generation of IAC, or is there something different happening with some of those worlds?
Yeah, I see it as a way of using IAC. It's more process than technology in from what I've seen.
Okay.
I think the important part is to be able to express what security policy is in a way that no humans need to interpret.
Okay.
The only reason we have a judicial branch of government is we can't write a law that everyone understands the same way. It is,
Yep.
Humans are subjective. The beauty of policy as code is it is deterministic. Well, if you're doing it right, it's deterministic.
Gotcha.
And that can create an agreement on what is acceptable and correct, and that could be applied to any stage of the software development lifecycle. And you can do it using GitOps techniques. You can, very often what you'll see is developers, and we're seeing this with our open source Regula project every day, developers want to just check stuff locally before it gets into some big process, right? You don't want to introduce a security issue into a build and cause a build to fail. If you're using policy as code the right way, you can cause that build fail over a security issue. And I would argue that security problems are just like any other bug in code. They're just like any other mistake in code. But the developer wants to see locally, while I'm building this Terraform template or this CloudFormation template or Kubernetes manifest or whatever, is what I'm doing going to be acceptable? And that's where, just having local tooling to be able to see what the result will be once it gets into the CI/CD pipeline will result in. And that's really what we're seeing is this very evolutionary process by which security is getting baked in to the normal practice of software development. And that's where it belongs. Developers ultimately will own 99% of security, because with the cloud and Kubernetes, we have the potential, we have the possibility, if we use them well, of creating deterministic systems based on writing code.
Yeah.
So that's where it's going. And I think that the old hat security companies are still thinking about this the wrong way. They're thinking, well, if we put more incident response tools in place, that doesn't matter that much. What matters is getting it right.
Right. Yeah. Getting into those inner and outer loops when the code's actually written versus blocking a lot of things later on. I'm curious. You talked a little bit about sort of this shift left movement. Sometimes it gets talked about in the context of DevSecOps. In that context, there's a certain amount of that's how you organize your people and your processes, and bringing together teams. And ultimately, who do you find, whether it's through surveying or through best practices, who ultimately kind of becomes responsible for security? Is it a little bit of everybody? Is there one group with the right tools that should be more responsible for it? Like how are things kind of evolving in that kind of responsibility space? Because even when we deal with the cloud, there's a certain amount of shared responsibility, how much the cloud sort of takes care of and how much you own. Like, how do you tend to think about, who's responsible, how to organize to be, best prepared, that type of thing?
Yeah. At this point, we're going through a transition in the industry. We're the move to cloud computing is causing a lot of cultural change. And by cultural change, I mean things like how the organization builds teams to build stuff using computers. And so the DevSecOps thing, we see a lot of this, is in my mind just the recognition that, as Andreessen once said, software is eating the world. You're going to see dev in front of a lot of things over time. It started with DevOps, now DevSecOps. What that trend is showing is that as we abstract these capabilities, right, and again, no longer having to drag a switch out to a data floor and plug wires into it, but instead making an API call, which is an abstraction, we're going to see developers controlling more and more of these things. And so in terms of who owns it, it really is dependent on the organization you're talking about. That is a cultural question more than a technical question. And we see a wide range. There are very companies and organizations with very traditional security practices where, and usually where those exist, there's a fair amount of conflict between people building stuff and people responsible for the security of it. I really believe that if everyone is responsible for something, no one is. Yeah. And so I think you have to break security, the word security, into different concerns and say who's responsible for what. So, for example, who is responsible for for building networks in secure ways? The engineering team is. Unless you're in an organization where some central security team lays down networks and then you populate them, and we've seen that too. It is the engineer who is creating that network in the cloud, if you will. So I think it comes down to security is a lot of things. It's a very broad topic. But if you are building things, ultimately you should be responsible for the correct design, the secure design of the things you're building.
Yeah. No, and I think that makes sense. It draws a direct path back to ownership. It makes you think about things from, early first principles and architecture and so forth, and sort of passing the buck just naturally becomes passing it again, and you get too much space between those who created it and sort of know how it's supposed to work and those that are burdened with trying to run the thing they never really dealt with in the first place. It makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you one other sort of question, because a lot of what we talked about today has been just this difference in how the cloud runs and people adapting to how the cloud runs and so forth. The cloud providers, the big three that you work with and others, have certain regulatory certifications, right? So they've got SOC 2 or NIST or GDPR or HIPAA or whatever. How should companies, especially if they're coming from the data center to the cloud, like typically they build their system such that in on-prem they know how to get them audited, they know how to pass through the audits. But when the cloud provider is doing some aspect of that, like how does that shared responsibility work? How do you think about that? Give me some sense of like where would you fall down if you try to take your data center principles into the cloud in those types of worlds? Because those have security aspects to them, but they're also, kind of what's old versus what's new.
Sure. So we both build tools that help people with this, and we also are ourselves subject to these things. We are SOC 2 accredited, so we live both sides of this. So I'll start with kind of some broad concepts and get down to some brass tacks. When a cloud provider says that they have a certification or an accreditation, whether it's SOC 2 or GDPR or HIPAA or whatever, what that means is the part that it is possible to build a system, an application on that cloud provider that is, whatever, GDPR or HIPAA compliant. It means it's possible to do that. So there's a way, at least one way, that you can use that cloud provider that will meet those criteria. It means that for the parts, what you'll see typically in these things, and I'm probably most familiar with NIST 800-53 because of my background, but you're going to have a combination in these things of like purely technical controls, things like you will have data encrypted at rest and in flight, and things like who can access your data floor and what your processes are, your human processes. A bunch of, and these are often organized into what are called controls. So in NIST, there are, I think, 1,800 or so of these controls. And what you're doing when you're going through one of these audits is answering to these controls. So when you're using a cloud service provider, in my example from earlier, because we're using Lambda, we are not managing operating system patching. Well, if you're a customer of AWS like us, AWS has already answered that question about operating system patching because they're doing it on the boxes that run our Lambdas. And so you inherit all that goodness as part of that. It's not on you, it's on the CSP. And they have documents to prove that they can provide you with. So depending on the architecture of your system in the cloud, you can push a lot of that responsibility onto the cloud service provider. You still, though, are going to be responsible for the design of the application and its implications. So a lot of times that has to do with transaction boundaries and data, how you handle and manage data. So that's where something like Fugue comes in. We can look at your environment and tell you if the stuff that you built on top of that cloud provider, if you've done the job for your part to be, HIPAA or GDPR compliant, et cetera.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense in the context of a lot of times you'll talk to companies, they're looking at the cloud as a place to lift and shift something that, they look at it as, hey, I'm getting out of my data center, but this application does a bunch of critical things. I don't want to change it. I can't change it. It's interesting to look at it from that perspective versus what you've done with Fugue, with your internal systems, to go, no. We built this thing from scratch. We used a number of systems, and the byproduct of using those systems is, like you said, we don't have to manage operating systems or other things that are part of those controls. So it's a really good explanation, because what it says is there is no one size fits all. You need to understand both what your application does, but also what the cloud provider does. And you may have, different perspectives based on, who you are, where you are in time, what the application does, those sort of things. That's really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, and our philosophy, I actually have a bunch of classes that touch on these things up on our YouTube, or at least a number of them. In particular, I would point you to the one on IAM security as it relates to serverless. In that one, I go into some depth on this, but what you really want to do, if you can, is push as much of this responsibility onto the cloud service provider as you can.
Sure.
And within reason, and that's it's an architectural decision. Are we going to stand up a cluster of EC2 instances and run Kubernetes on that, and therefore be responsible all the way down to the hypervisor? Or are we going to use, ECS or EKS, where we have less responsibility? I'm a big advocate of having less responsibility and paying Amazon to do it or Microsoft to do it. So
yeah, especially when you have got a million other things to do to keep your business running and focused on your customers. We didn't spend a lot of time digging into all the results of the survey. We did put links in the show notes. We put links in for a number of things that we talked about today. So if you're going, hey, Josh made a really good point about this or a really good point about that, there will be links in the show notes for a lot of the things we talked about. So if you're listening to this on the road or running or wherever, don't feel like you need to stop and jot something down. Josh, it's always fascinating to talk to you. We probably could do this for another hour or so, but I know you're very, very busy running the business, and I want to be conscious of your time. Any good places if folks want to engage with the Fugue team, really kind of understand more and more of policy as code and the things that you guys do to help transition people into the cloud, understand the differences, especially from a security perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. You can come to our website is the best place to find us.
Sure.
It's fugue.co, fugue.co. I am Josh at fugue.co, and I do try to answer all non-advertising emails. Those get ignored.
Sure.
Go if you go to the website, we have a guarantee that in 15 minutes we will show you where you have security issues in your cloud infrastructure. And if you reach out to us, you can try this for free. We'll help you get it set up. It's really easy to get set up. And I think that's, even if you're just using us to do that and you never intend to buy the product, do it, because it will tell you what you should be concerned about. And, one of my favorite G2 reviews of Fugue, and it's a really positive review, but it starts with Fugue is going to hurt your feelings. It's not out of malice. We're just very, very thorough, and we'll help you see and know some things that you might not know, and we will probably help you find those. So 90% of hacking is discovery, and 90% of security is knowledge.
Yeah. So
let us give you some knowledge.
Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff, Josh. It's always good to have you on the show. It's good to be able to pick your brain. We appreciate you coming back on. Folks, with that, I'm going to wrap up. I want to thank Josh on behalf of myself and Aaron. Thanks to everybody who listens to the show every week, tells a friend about the show, helps us grow the community. And with that, I'm going to wrap up, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.